Thank you so much for making it out this evening. And we are going to start our event. And we would like to have Professor Iqbal Singh Sevea come and make a few comments. And then we will start with the presentation, and then we will have a bit of a panel discussion. So may I please request Professor Iqbal to come?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. Leadership of CSEP, friends, colleagues, and I'm particularly delighted that I see some faces who have been associated with ISAS for some time now, and we've been in joint events together. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for joining us. As many of us know, if there's anything we've learned since Trump came to power, always say thank you at the start, say thank you in the middle, and say thank you at the end again. So if you hear me saying thank you, apart from welcoming you, you know why I'm doing it, right? I'm a student of geopolitics. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us for this seminar. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. But I'm also delighted to be here, or I should say, and I'm also delighted to be here because this seminar marks the launch of a joint project between CSEP and ISAS. I'll describe ISAS in a bit, but essentially ISAS is the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. And this project explores the potential of China and India engaging in climate diplomacy. It asks a number of questions. Should India and China engage in climate diplomacy? What are the benefits that they can avail from each other? What are the limitations that each we confront in pursuing such forms of diplomacy? But also, if they are to engage in climate diplomacy, then what sort of a strategic framework should India develop to take this forward? And I know that Pooja and the fellow commentators will say much more about this, and they'll be much more intelligent in their comments on this, so I'm not going to risk embarrassing myself by trying to preempt anything that they say, except to say that this project has immense amount of potential and also raises a number of broader issues relating both to geopolitics but also to climate futures as well. Now, the project is both timely and essential as major global economies and carbon emitters. India and China play a central role in shaping the future of climate action. But India and China have also both set about very ambitious climate transition ambitions as well. And as all of you are as familiar with, as perhaps more familiar than me, is that India has certain limitations with regards to its relationship with China in this sense, because India's transition aims are linked to imports from China. China, on its part, is concerned about technology transfer as well. So these are issues that we'll be engaging with throughout this project, and I'll leave the more expert analysts to deal with. But what I want to highlight here is that this is a very important project for the Institute of South Asian Studies as well, because it marks an important collaboration between ISAS and CSEP. This is not our first collaboration. In fact, a number of you have been to ISAS events, and a number of ISAS staff have been to CSEP events. So in a sense, this is a culmination of collaborative efforts that have been going on for some time. And this is also particularly important to us because the research focus of the Institute of South Asian Studies and CSEP overlaps with each other. Now, just let me, if you allow me 30 seconds to introduce what the Institute of South Asian Studies is. The Institute of South Asian Studies is an institute that's based in the National University of Singapore. And we have a number of research focus areas that we work on. And I'll just very briefly explain international relations and geopolitics, domestic politics of South Asia, strategic technologies, trade and economics, and our youngest cluster is climate and the environment. In the climate and environment cluster, we focus on a few issues, climate diplomacy being one of them. And we've done that, I'm very happy to say, in collaboration with CSEP. In fact, our first few projects have been there, and this is a continuation of that. But we also see this project as one in which it's not just about climate, but it's about geopolitics as well. And this is where the Institute of South Asian Studies and CSEP, we bring our complementary strengths to the table. CSEP has a long established track record of excellent academic work, excellent policy relevant research, but also a very strong footing in the Indian policy ecosystem. I like to say that ISAS also has a similar strong academic track record, but then I'll be talking about my own institute, so I leave that to somebody else to say. Please do say it. Um, but jokes aside, we have an established track record of research in the area of geopolitics, but we also have a strategic position in Southeast Asia that allows us to study South Asia in a broader framework. And we've had established links with China for a number of years. We work with institutes there. So this is what we hope to bring into this collaboration as well. So I've said enough. I'm aware of the fact that I'm touching the time barrier. So I go back to where I started from, and thank you all for being here. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. So Pooja, all yours.
No, I think we should thank you for being here, for all the Singaporeans who managed to make it here. Yeah, so I will not take up more time, but yeah, we are really excited about this collaboration. It's going to be a 1 year project, and we are going to do a lot of exciting things, which I will just be speaking about. So basically, we are trying to understand, and as Iqbal already painted, it's a very complicated geopolitical uh, si- situation in the world right now. But the truth is that if India needs to undertake its climate transitions, there will be some dependence on China for that. And so, how do we make sure that this geopolitics and the India China climate cooperation can be strategic? And that's the whole point of the project. So from the Center for Social and Economic Progress, it's going to be me that's working on it, and then there's Constantino Xavier who leads the foreign policy team. Many of you might already know him, and it's Shruti Jargad, who could not be here. She's on holiday, but she's a China expert within this project. And then from ISAS, there's Karthik Nachiappan, who is also going to lead it from their side. But we have a lot of stalwarts. I mean, we aren't the first people who are actually studying this. There's obviously Montek Singh and Vikram Mehta, Rahul Tongia, and Ambassador Menon, of course. Um, and of course, Raja Mohan as well. A lot of stalwarts who have already experienced and have expertise in this, who we will also be leaning on to support us. Um, this is part. So me, I'm a climate person, so I'm very happy with this creeping in of climate change into into the geopolitics. I think at one point a lot of geopolitics would not deal with climate change, but I think the reality has become that we do have to. And I think at CSEP we have kind of foreseen this, and for the past 2 years we have started our global climate cooperation program, where we really try to understand that how can India navigate climate diplomacy, and how can we keep in mind both international commitments that we have towards climate change, but also how can we meet our own domestic goals of energy transitions and climate action. And I think one thing that we're also seeing a bit more and more, if you kind of follow what the government is trying to do, is trying to be a leader in climate action, particularly in the global south. I think you'll see a lot of this narratives that also came up in G20 when we had the presidency. So we are trying to untangle some of these conversations, and these are some of the publications that we have, which you can find outside, but also online. So I'll just get now into the uh, project. So what do we know? The country, as we all know, has a lot of ambitious energy transition policies, and I think it's going to stay that way. So just because Western countries are moving away maybe from the climate commitments, I don't see that happening here. But how do we meet these ambitious climate policies that we have made? So our significant share of tech and critical minerals, whether we like it or not, is dominated by China. Um, for example, 80% of our solar panels does come from there. We have often tried to protect and promote our own domestic industry from this dominance of China. We have sometimes taken anti-dumping policies. We have restricted visas for Chinese to come here, and we have also taken a lot of steps to promote our own domestic our domestic manufacturing capacity. But the reality is that we are not there yet, and we will not be there yet in at least the short term or the medium term, that we will become domestically resilient on our own manufacturing capacity. But on the other hand, China is also doing its own part in kind of pulling away, silently withdrawing its own technical personnel as well from the Indian industry, because they as well don't want, I mean, they of course see us as competition and don't want to help us in kind of building our own indigenous manufacturing. So we see this kind of push pull where what I say is cooperation within conflict and competition, right? So now how does India make a strategic framework to kind of unravel these things? As we seek to become an alternate supplier, so there are a lot of Western countries, a lot of other countries in the world that are also kind of nervous about China's dominance in these fields. So then India is often seen as an alternate to it. But then how do we really strategize and move away from this dominance? And one thing that we all know, China is our neighbor at the end of the day. Nimi will speak more about this. So we also have a lot of shared, especially water resources, that we do share with them. So however, and climate change is going to affect these. There's going to be a lot of, I mean, glacial melting, floods, as we all know, these in these shared areas as well. So how are we going to navigate that, and can we now navigate that through some kind of climate cooperation? So what is already out there? So as I said, we are not the first ones, nor I'm sure will be the last ones to study this. So there has been some work already done on how India partners with energy and climate. But one of the focus areas has not been bilaterals, but rather it has been how does India and China coordinate at multilaterals such as the UNFCCC, or what stances have they taken as the global south when it comes to the global north? But now we're in a multipolar world. It's no more global south versus global north. I mean, these large emerging economies have their own interests as well. And so I think now what is more important is to focus on these bilaterals, because most of the existing literature that was done goes maybe up to 2009 to Copenhagen and maybe up to 2015, but within the last 10 years so much has changed. None of the literature captures the fact that China is the dominant supplier of this tech. So within this changing environment, we don't know what the strategy should be. And the studies that do exist on this newer emerging China as a climate leader are all from the global north. So we need an India specific strategy, because not, we are a neighbor, so they're kind of direct geopolitics. But we also have to kind of come up with our own literature on this. So that's why we feel this study is interesting. And why now? So why is now the correct time to do this? So as we know, the world is changing. I mean, 5, 10 years ago, when I started on my climate journey, I was sure that climate change is the way that the world is going to go, in the sense that all countries are going to come together and work on it. I did not expect what we're seeing now, where we see the withdrawal of a lot of countries. They're going back on on their stances. There is a lot of changing trade tensions as well. I mean, if you see the 2014 visit of Obama to China, the narrative is so different on climate change than what currently US and China speak about. We also see that now India is slowly, I would not say we're there yet, but we're slowly wanting to get a seat at the table. So that means we will have to engage much more on climate change. We are also trying to position ourselves as a leader in the global south. So what competitive implications does climate have on this? Because as we know, large ocean states and least developed countries are going to have the most repercussions from climate change. Um, and I think lastly, why now? Because as we all know, in the past few months, there has been an opening of tensions. I mean, so there has been an opening and a thawing of tensions between India and China. Both foreign ministers from both countries have, in the past few months, stated that both countries can work with each other for mutual interest, and bilateral ties can be of interest. Um, so we'll need to understand how this can work, because as we know, with the recent tensions between our neighborhood as well, now again China has come about in a bad way within India. So this will always be this push pull. So there will be openings and closings, but the point is both countries are actively taking a stance that we need to work with each other in order for the dragon and elephant have to work with each other. So we feel now is the right time to at least start asking some of these questions. So, what is our research agenda? So, phase one will be more mapping of what has happened in the past. What are the different institutional channels? What are the engagements? And how has India engaged on these topics with China in the past? And can we learn from this in order to go in the future? But also, it's important to understand whether India should. I mean, do we need to have a strategic policy with China, or can we go on as we are? And if we do need a strategic one, then how and what will it look like? So phase one will be more of a broader mapping, and then phase two we'll actually go sector specific. We'll see what are the risks and opportunities for India to engage with China on specific sectors that we feel are important. What are the strategies that India should consider? For example, like when if it's solar panels or critical minerals, what are kind of the risks and opportunities within these specific sectors, and we will also study the experiences of other countries in the in the region and beyond, to understand how can China and India work on these things strategically. So we've done a mapping exercise where since Rio, so since 1993 till present, we try to understand, okay, so how have India and China actually worked with each other? Like what has happened in the past? This was Shruti Jargad, who I said who's not here now, but she worked extensively on this for the past few months. She kind of mapped all of the engagements which have happened. How have they happened? What kind were they? Was it an MOU? Was it a statement? Was it a plan? And which departments have engaged with it, and on what topics have we engaged on? And we also, did some comparison of both the countries, and we can see that China is far ahead of us in the sense that in the energy consumption is much higher, electricity consumption is much higher. So you cannot compare both, because it's like comparing apples and oranges. So we'll need to see that, both these countries have to have their strategic interests in place if you need to make this happen. um, but what we do know is that we have a far bigger trade dependence on them than they do on us. So what types of engagements have happened? So as we can see in the past, since 1993 till date, there has been engagement on climate and energy. I think the peaking years were between 2013 and 2015. Why were these? Well, two reasons. Perhaps one is because the Paris Agreement was happening around then, but another reason can also be because Modi had just come to government and he had visited China a few times within those years. So a lot of conversations were happening then. There are a lot of types of engagement: MOUs, joint statements, agreement, the dialogues, and plans. Uh, Surprisingly, between 1994 to 2002, there were no engagements, and then post Gulf One, which is 2020, there's also been no engagement, which makes sense. But we need to untangle what has happened between 1993 to 2003. Why were there no engagements in this time? Maybe climate was not yet a big topic, or or maybe it started only a bit later. The channels of cooperation are plenty. So there have been plenty of channels. There's been scientific exchanges, there have been business exchanges, there have been tech transfer, there's been joint regulations, standards, settings, norms, joint R&D. So, it's been very diverse. And we wouldn't say that there's any one way in which India has engaged with China, but it's been through multiple ways. The actor participation has been at the subnational. There are a lot of sister city agreements. We see also at the national, the business community, so a lot of joint projects, PPPs, etc., etc. A lot of scientific exchanges as well. Civil society mapping is harder because we don't know what is really happening from these agreements. But I've heard that there is a lot also has happened in the past with civil society as well. A lot of it was also data sharing, especially for the water governance. A lot of water data has also been shared. Um, yeah, so our key takeaways is that right now we can see from past engagements that there's been a wide ranging. So any topic you can think of within the energy and climate space has been covered under these agreements, both in climate adaptation and mitigation. A lot of it has been on on urbanization and planning, sustainability around that, water conservation and the environment, and within energy as well. It's both in oil, gas, and coal, but also on energy efficiency and renewable energies. So there's been a wide ambit. But what we are saying is that this wide ambit does not really suit us. I mean, we cannot just say that we'll work on anything and everything, right? There need to be certain key strategic entry points which we have, and our research calls for this kind of a strategic approach, that we focus on certain key areas of mutual interest. So for now, our prayers and thoughts, and this is just some brainstorming, and we'd love to hear from you as well, is mainly on trade agreements and supply chains, on tech information and knowledge exchange, and as I said, on climate resilience of shared natural resources. I mean, we might be missing on something else that's key, and hopefully with our stakeholder interviews and things, those might come out. So what is our project going to be? So after we've done this initial mapping, we want to understand, okay, what are these strategic entry points? What frames and topics should we focus on? Who should we engage with? So within India and internationally, it's a bit clearer, but Chinese scholars, any help would be great. Which Chinese scholars should we actually be engaging with? And how do we get stakeholder buy-in? Because right now, this is a geopolitically thorny issue can be. So, then is this something we should be getting stakeholder buy-in with? And if so, then how? And we will do this through qualitative analysis, interviews, stakeholder workshops, which will be jointly held in Singapore and as well as here. So we are really excited to leverage our partnership with ISAS to hold these stakeholder workshops as well, so we can get both networks and get, I think, the best work that we can. So at that point, I will stop, and I will love to hear from our three commenters. So as I said, they are experts on different things. So one is Ashok Kantha, Kantha, who will obviously bring in a lot of geopolitics from his own experiences. Then we have Annika Seiler from the ADB, who has worked a lot on energy transitions and supply chains as well. And then, of course, we'll hear from Nimmi, who has worked a lot on border governance. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Ambassador Kantha. We would love to hear your interventions. Ambassador Kantha, you can speak now. We can't hear you.
Just
Yeah. Oops. Should we start with Annika then, or? But I'm thinking maybe we can start. Oh yeah, Annika, do you want to start first, and then we can go to Ambassador Kantha once he gets online.
Yeah, I can start. Good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to listen and participate in this discussion. And I think it's a very interesting topic you are proposing as a study with India and China as one of the two largest emerging economies and probably most important players in terms of climate change, despite geopolitical complexities and competition in some areas. I think it's not even a question whether the countries should collaborate, but I think exactly you are on point how these kinds of collaborations can be organized effectively. And I would also like to recognize that both countries are collaborating already very actively at the multilateral level. They are founding members of the BRICS. They have jointly founded the New Development Bank. India is also a founding member of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And of course, they are both very important members of the Asian Development Bank. And as you know, the multilateral development banks are important providers of climate finance and also significant players in terms of climate change research. And India and China are collaborating very intensively at that level with each other already. And so when you say how this collaboration can be organized, of course, there are many areas in the energy transition, and I will shortly highlight a few, how the two countries can collaborate on energy transition and climate change bilaterally. But I think an important aspect in this study is also how they are collaborating and how they support each other or one the other at the multilateral institution level. I mean, I just highlighted the Asian institutions. Of course, they are also at the World Bank level. So I would also like to highlight one other aspect, flagship publication on Asia's way to net zero transition. The Asian Development Bank published in 2023 clearly showed, the research in this paper showed that with regional cooperation and integration, this mutual global dedication to net zero can be achieved more cost-effective and faster. So competition and isolation will slow the process and will it make much more costly. So having said that, I just highlight a few aspects in the energy transition where we see that bilateral collaboration can be extremely beneficial. And now I look how it could also help India's ambitions. So you already mentioned critical minerals and clean energy technology manufacturing. From my perspective, there is also important opportunities to collaborate. Of course, India has the ambition to reduce its reliance, and diversification and strengthening resilience through diversification is important. As you know, India has made a lot of progress in terms of developing its lithium reserves, just as an example. So in terms of exploration, there are opportunities. So let me look at the critical mineral value chain from exploration to smelting to recycling and zero waste. I think China has very innovative technologies. How can they collaborate, attract foreign direct investments, and how can they how could India also acquire and learn from these technologies? So that could be either through attracting foreign direct investments or, as you already highlighted, the different opportunities for collaboration. But it could also be through an honest broker like the Asian Development Bank. And we have done such studies where there is a joint studies between China and India on important climate technologies. I have a few years ago led a technical assistance project where both China and India look together at demonstration and deployment of carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies. And such studies from a multilateral development bank plays the role of an honest broker, and they enhance a mutual understanding, mutual capacity building, and dialogue at a neutral stage. So I think these are opportunities, and that could be done in areas where there is competition between the two. So also in the critical minerals area or clean energy technology manufacturing. Of course, India can also, through exchange at the academic area, China has excellent research institutions, and same as India, and also very excellent think tanks like yourself. So I think there can also be a very active joint researches. So I think I have already exceeded maybe my 8 minutes, so maybe I stop here and come back in if you want on another question. Thank you very much for now.
Much. Thank you for those very helpful notes. Ambassador Kanta, are you okay now?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Great,
No,
great, great.
I'm sorry, there was some
No, 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 no,
temporary
no.
glitch.
All good. Yeah, we would love to hear from you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Pooja, for inviting me to join this discussion. Climate change has been part of India-China dialogue for quite some time. And generally, we look at climate change as one area where we have been able to collaborate quite effectively, especially in multilateral platforms. Though, as you mentioned in your initial remarks, in recent years, bilateral collaboration has stalled because of reasons we are familiar with. But we did continue to cooperate in both COP28 and COP29, both bilaterally as also under aegis of basic group of countries. I will, make my remarks on 3 points very quickly. One, why we need to reimagine India-China collaboration in climate change. 2, climate diplomacy. And 3, clean energy, green energy transition. On the first point, we're all familiar what has happened in the India-China relations in recent years, post-Ukraine, post-Eastern Ladakh, and now post-Operation Sindoor also. You would have noticed that Indian diplomatic parliamentary delegations are going to various countries, in fact, all UNSC members except Pakistan and China. That itself sends certain signals. So we have a sort of difficult moment in India-China relations, which comes in the way of enlarging space for collaboration. Though I must point out that traditionally we have differentiated between our working together on multilateral issues, global issues, and bilateral, relations. I'll come to that later when we discuss climate diplomacy. China also had changed a lot. In fact, the way they look at their collaboration with India in the climate space is very different today than what was the case earlier. For instance, Copenhagen 2009, the way they looked at India, sought our support. COP21 Paris, it was very different. As you're aware, prior to COP21, China did a side deal with the USA. I still remember that it was only after this understanding was firmed up that then Chinese chief negotiator Xie Zhenhua, he invited me and other basic ambassadors for a briefing. So basically, we were told what has happened rather than being consulted. And this, trend of China seeking bilateral, understandings with developed countries has continued in subsequent COP meetings as well. Then, and our positions, if you look, I don't want to go into detail, but if you go into specifics of how India and China looked at coal phase out or phase down at COP 28, 29, how we looked at climate finance, our positions were similar, but with fair amount of divergence, given the fact that there's a huge capability gap which has emerged between India and China. Pooja referred to the fact that energy consumption of China per capita is 5 times as much as India now. Their per capita emission is 4.5 times as much as India. So we are not quite in the same corner any longer. A third aspect which has caused, which it needs, rethinking is, again, it was referred to both by Pooja and Annika about, dependency which has come to develop in our clean energy transition. I'm not going to numbers, but this is one area where dependency is already being weaponized. For instance, rare earth magnets. You might have seen reports that China insisting on end use, user certification, and in fact, some of the Indian EV companies who depend on China, they are already running out of stock of rare earth magnets. And this is something which will continue, it will expand. And there is a very major concern today about China Shock 2.0 when it comes to, high-tech manufacturing, specifically, clean tech manufacturing, because kind of overcapacities China has built up and kind of dominance they have come to acquire in this space is sort of sucking oxygen out of the system, and this is affecting both developed and developing countries alike. Uh, and here, the problem we have, as Pooja mentioned, we are in a catch-22 situation. Our energy transition cannot possibly roll out without working closely with China, because there's such a heavy degree of dependence on China, even in areas where we had relatively successful PLI schemes like solar panels, but we're still getting most of components from China. So we would like to move away from dependency, and yet in short to medium term, that's going to be a very difficult proposition. But given requirement of both our economy and economic security, this objective will be pursued quite strongly by Government of India, I suspect. Finally, a new situation is arisen today after US withdrawal from Paris Agreement, and basically developed countries losing the appetite for climate action, climate finance. This really calls for basic countries, especially China and India, to play a much larger role in terms of pushing the agenda at the next COP30 on a number of areas. I'll not go into specifics here again, but this is actually a requirement. Now, looking at new pathways, climate diplomacy, I suspect in near term, our focus will continue to be mainly on working under aegis of a basic group of countries, as we did at COP28 and in Dubai, COP29 in Baku. There are a whole lot of areas where we have convergent interests, and a basic group of could in fact managed to amplify voice of developing countries, in particular on key issues like equity, climate finance, so even on issues like coal phase down. Uh, but there are limitations, capacity limitations. There are concrete outcomes. Ability of basic to push through is relatively limited, and geopolitical dynamics also don't quite work to advantage of basic countries. But there are, as I mentioned, several key areas of convergence. Now, bilaterally, we have the framework. When I was ambassador in China, we had the MOU. Despite our unhappiness with the US-China side deal of November 2014, we had we did an MOU. There's already a framework agreement of 2009. Under strategic economic dialogue, Dr. Ahluwalia was leading from our side at that time. We pursued number of concrete projects. Unfortunately, in terms of tangible outcomes, we didn't achieve much. But we can resume that process once relations improve to a certain extent. And here, areas like renewable energy manufacturing, clean climate finance, green hydrogen, coal transition, all these areas, a lot of possibility of working together. But I suspect that in near term, it's not going to work out because of problems I referred to, bilateral problems, geopolitical differences. And China also is reluctant to sort of help with capacity building in India. I come to third point, last point here about clean energy transition. Here we have, as I mentioned earlier, a very difficult situation where we have to work with China, and yet China is our primary challenge when we try to expand our capabilities, because the level of dependence on China is so heavy already, and in many areas China is just not reluctant, just not prepared to share technology or equipment for that matter. Just to give an example, for if you want to move up the value chain, we need to fabricate wafers and not just modules and panels in India. Now, machinery for fabricating wafers are controlled almost entirely by China, and they have not shared that with us. EVs, again, they're not prepared to pass on technology for that. I referred earlier to rare earth magnets, how their end user certification requirement is causing problems straight away, in fact, at this point of time. And also our ability to compete with China, number of reasons why they are so competitive. There's no way we can compete with them on cost of any of these products. So we have a predicament of import dependence, of massive trade deficit. Last year, it was in excess of $100 billion. And, it's likely to keep growing, partly because of requirement of sourcing, green energy products from China, and economic security concern. We have cost disadvantage I've referred to, and China's dominance of entire, clean energy ecosystem, including critical minerals and rare earth elements. Our PLI scheme made some headway on, for instance, on photovoltaic cells, but still dependence on China hasn't come down. And this is, as I see, this sort of predicament is likely to continue. How do we deal with it? But this is one area I think we'll have to look at separately from climate diplomacy, because this will be more bilateral. Here, I think we'll have to put in place a new framework for negotiating with China. where we leverage our market size. China is also going through, they have just to give you one example, solar panel companies, they are dominating. More than 80% of market is with them, but top 7 solar panel companies of China, in fact, they're losing money.
Can I
Yeah,
request you
yeah.
to wrap up the
Yeah,
comments?
I'm just wrapping up. So,
Thank you.
we'll have to look at, diversification of technology sources and enter into a more meaningful dialogue with China, which has been suspended for some time. So I'll stop here by saying that when it comes to climate diplomacy, in near term, our focus will have to be more working on the aegis of basic and look at how we can coordinate position with China in multilateral platforms, especially upcoming COP30. But India and China taking any major initiative is unlikely. When it comes to clean tech manufacturing, it's going to be a very major challenge for us, but area I think we need to. I'll conclude there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nimmi, now the hardest part, the shared water governance. We just saw what happened with the Indus Water Treaty. And with climate change, a lot of these shared resources issues are just going to increase. So how do you see this diplomacy playing out?
Yeah. Right. So first things first, delighted to be here. Congratulations to the entire team on the project launch. Promises to be a very exciting set of questions that you're looking at. I think a conversation like this is important for a variety of reasons, for sure. But I think it's for a relationship, for the India-China relationship, I think it's fundamentally critical for 3 reasons. One, because the relationship is intrinsically crisis prone and therefore requires us to invest in in additional platforms, open new multiple lines of parallel channels of communication. And the second is the sheer, it's important because I think because of the sheer convening capacity of these 2 actors, both individually and collectively, and to which many of you have already spoken about how much they've kind of worked together, continuing to work together. The third really reason is, is what I'd like to focus on is the shared nature of, they happen to share a set of challenges in a shared neighborhood. And for all these reasons, these are 2 actors who really ought to be talking a lot more and not just episodically, and which is the kind of the challenge. And you, Pooja, asked us to, in your note to us, asked us to look at the challenges. So this is one of the challenges, and really to kind of change the grammar of securitization or the dominant narrative, and really it's I think useful to kind of take to recall the warning that the Nigerian activist author Chimamanda Adichie mentions of the talks of the dangers, quote unquote, the dangers of the single story. So you really need to go beyond the single story and try to imagine multiple futures, some of which you mentioned and the other panelists have mentioned. So talking of the challenges that further, when you look at this shared neighborhood, I think the first thing that stands out for me that I think is the biggest challenge that faces these 2 countries is weak institutionalism. Especially when you look at shared water resources and natural resources, it's weak institutionalism that has sort of defined their interactions so far, and it's the absence of really formal institutional entry points to to advance a sort of any sort of claims. So I think weak institutionalism is, I'd like to argue, has not served India's interests, because it's like aiming low and hitting lower. So you have, by design and by choice, a certain gone in for this, what I call weak institutional design. By it is by choice. It is not something which is despite trying. And I think it has not served India's interests, and going forward, it will extract greater costs, social, economic, ecological, and it has shut out. I mean, among the kind of costs it has already, that we are paying for it, it has shut out valuable dialogic space. It has imposed minimal demands on China. It has virtually given China a free hand as far as natural resources are concerned. And as far as India is concerned, it has shown a sort of proclivity to keep, or a preference to keep, institutional thresholds low, and consequently expectations lower. And a quick example of this would be the kind of agreement that we have on the Brahmaputra, the hydrological data sharing agreements, where we have a bunch of what are MOUs, which are what I call the bane of this is, again, keeping Chimamande's warning, is that it is a single issue debate, which is fixated on just diversion, just looks only at quantity. And the fixation with diversion, as I've argued elsewhere, has diverted the entire debate with China, because we have self-consciously kept the bar low and hit lower. And whenever there's been crunch time, like Dhoklam, that's also led to data denial. So it isn't as though this is the playbook by which China works, interacts with others, which is not the case, whether you look at Mekong or smaller neighbors elsewhere. So the point is that some of it is our own choices, and the Bazari logic with which we have worked, for instance, where we have gone in for we have been absolutely, and this is the very disturbing part, and we have no one to blame for this but ourselves, where we have an annual, as I said, the MOU is about data sharing agreement, where we pay China annually 82 lakhs, 82 lakh rupees to fetch data for us from 3 stations in Tibet. So the point is that we do not seem to be conscious of the fact that the same data we give Pakistan or Bangladesh, till we used to give Pakistan till recently, was institutionalizing the norm of regional public good, water as a regional public good. But we go on to undercut that norm when it comes to dealing with China on a critical water resource. So, so we can see that changing this conversation it's easier said than done. This is a potential conversation, conversation of change, but changing that conversation is not really is not going to be that easy. So how do we then go about that? And one possible, option I would suggest is to bring scale into the conversation, to move, to bring the subnational. And the very interesting, during some of my field work in Ladakh, and talking to the Ladakh LAHDC, and that is the Ladakh Leh Autonomous Hill District Council and the Kargil Autonomous Hill District Council officials. Very interesting. What the takeaways for me is that first, you're beginning to see a new set of interlocutors emerge who have a great interest and incentive to change this grammar of securitization from below, because these are, resources they depend on, and for obvious reasons, they are in the first line of, first responders. They are and the good part of the story is that some of these conversations are already taking place, and they're already taking place on questions like water, climate resilience, bringing India and China, Pakistan, Afghanistan together in an initiative called the Upper Indus Basin Initiative, which has been around for several years now. I think 2013 it was set up. It is interestingly a model of and this is not esoteric, it is a hybrid policy network, brings together practitioners and researchers together, is already working on the ground to plug knowledge gaps that we have always ad nauseum be talking about, bring about whether it is about precipitation, whether it is so a whole bunch of things. A lot of good work is already being done on by 4 basin countries. A very interesting model perhaps for Brahmaputra in the days to come. If time wrap up?
Yeah, just a minute.
Okay, yeah, that's it. So again, the other I mentioned the rise of new interlocutors. I see in the Indian Himalayan region, 13 states, they are already beginning conversations. Like there is this initiative called the what the legislators Himalayan, is it the Himalayan or legislators meet? It's a mountain legislators meet, which is founded by the former MP P.D. Rai from Sikkim, and it's been around for 20 years. Again, doing very interesting, looking at waste management issues, the whole concept of trash mountains, who are going to be, so interlocutors are already there changing this grammar from below, and they've produced a fair bit of and also what they are doing is they're institutionalizing habits of trust and creating those. And this reminds me of what the early decades of the Mekong River Commission, the earlier predecessor was called the Mekong Committee, which invested the first few decades of its institutional history to data gathering, so as to build habits of trust and to get used to the idea of working together. So, and the other takeaway is that from all of this that I, in my a little bit of field work in the region, is that the subnational has led where the federal has lagged. And that is good. I mean, there's always a great intersection that one can find. So very quickly, if we have the time, there are 3 positives that I see from all of this. One is that these are actors who are going to bring valuable domain knowledge that national policy makers have no means of acquiring on their own, because they are based out there these are the sites they're based on. They also, second, it has the potential to institutionalize new social safeguard norms. And in this case, a very quick illustrative example is something called extended product responsibility. And what EPR essentially does is to make it incumbent on manufacturers to take responsibility for the environmental effects of their products for the entire life cycle of that. So this is not being, mind you, being managed from Delhi, or even this is not being convened from here. This is being done from Leh and Kargil. Ladakh, for instance, hosted the recent the mountain legislators meet. So there are about 20 legislators in the Indian Himalayan region from 13 Himalayans in the Indian Himalayan region states, from Meghalaya and all right up till Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh. So all of them are the ones who are institutionalizing this norm. And the last but not the least is the potential to bring a concept like climate resilience into a much needed, much necessary conversation with just transitions. Because as we all know, many of these changes that are taking place are having and are going to have disproportionate impact on different groups. So how are we going to kind of shine a light on that? So I think just to kind of conclude, I think a project like this has the capacity to, right now, the way it is designed, I see an excellent sort of vertical governance sort of design. It could also, I mean, it would be a good idea as a suggestion. What I would like to suggest is that you could also look at find intersections with horizontal governance networks, which are actually bringing very valuable domain knowledge. I think I'll stop with that.
No, I think that was amazing, because that was a point that we saw, that we can't track just by looking at secondary literature. We can't track what's happening. That's not in these official documents. So this is the kind of knowledge and insight that we need. So thank you so much. On that, I will open the floor to questions. So we have around 20 minutes for question and answers. You can ask me, you can ask the panelists. Please feel free. There's one there, that gentleman there. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we can go 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very, very interesting session. I'm very happy that CSEP, we are doing this study, because I think it's much wider than maybe you've even realized. Because climate change issue is really a shared big problem, which is not going to be solved in my lifetime. Probably in your, maybe it might be solved in your lifetime, Pooja. So the point is that in this issue, I'm sort of giving my remarks in a similar vein as Nimmi, actually. That in this issue, we've got to cooperate. So in some sense, I think it'll be great if in this project, our attitude is to find solutions for problems, rather than the general Indian current attitude of putting problems in front of solutions with respect to China. So I think that's a very important thing, and I like very much Nimmi's remarks in terms of in that area. So just 3, 4 specific points. One on climate, one on critical minerals processing, etc. Look, there is no chance in hell, okay, that we are going to compete with China. We must understand that the whole world is dependent on them, not just us, including the United States. So at least our attitude ought to be, look, they have this expertise, they have this. How do we take advantage of it? And how do we cooperate with them and get their cooperation? Yes, I know, as Ambassador Kantha said, there are some issues in terms of what they are doing in terms of their policy. Two, and we shouldn't regard it as dependence. Now, Ambassador Kantha mentioned PLI. I happen to know in some detail what's happening in the cell phone industry, which we regard as the most successful PLI. The fact is that 90% of the components used come from China. Okay? And so if we can be, quote, dependent, I don't think of it as dependence, it's just part of trade and industry. Then on an important issue like climate change, why should we think of that as dependence as opposed to an opportunity on which we can work on? One issue was very marginally mentioned is urban. And again, a shared issue, which is that we have now about 65 cities probably with over 1 million population. They, I think, have already about 150, right? No other country has this. So in terms of climate change and urbanization, planning, etc., again, a huge shared interest. Then the EVs and, sorry, one area that is not mentioned by most people across the world is that the emissions from the steel and cement industries are higher than from energy and from power, whereas all the attention is on energy. And my point there, specific to India and China, is that we are going to be the next 20 years the largest producers of cement and the largest producers of steel. So these two problems are specific to India and China. And to the extent that the technology today does not exist for economical capture of emissions from these industries, the West is less interested because they're not growing. They won't need that much cement. Similarly, they have so much steel scrap that all the manufacturing is from electric arc furnaces. I want to go into detail of this. My point is that these are the areas that can be looked at, which have common interest, where R&D will not happen in the developed countries. And I can go on for this for a long time, but I just want to say that we need to find that her attitude in this study must be to find put solutions in front of problems. And despite the political geopolitics, etc., which we of course understand, I always say that if Taiwan can have the densest economic relationship with China, they have the most to fear from China. So why can't Ambassador Kantha and his friends from diplomatic service find ways and means of going under the radar in terms of the major geopolitical issues so that we gain from this? I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's a gentleman there.
Yes, my basic question is that we are finding that as far as China is concerned, they are able to collaborate on major projects, with CPEC, with Pakistan, and many countries, with supply chains as far as Vietnam is concerned on nuclear energy, with on bullet trains, etc. So how can we, be integrated with them, because we are going to be having trade deficit with them on if we import EVs and solar modules, etc., which won't be sustainable in the long run, because in the long run that will basically be very negative for the India's economy. So we have to collaborate on projects accordingly. And my second point is that we are also finding that they are innovating quite a lot on low Earth orbit satellites, which are basically going to be able to map all these what you call agricultural and climate issues, etc. And these innovations are going to be very important. So we have to collaborate on these low Earth orbit satellites, on all these innovations, so that we can grow accordingly. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can hear me.
My name is Ravi Bhuthalingam. Just a couple of things. I worked in industry for many years, and one of the things I did 7 or 8 years ago is mediate in some disputes amongst companies run by some very powerful individuals. Now, there was a very interesting thing which is relevant to this. The patriarchs of these two companies who were bitterly fighting, and in fact, it was their sons who were quarreling, really. They said, look, these two chaps will keep fighting, but we will ensure that the grandchildren are okay. This is the agreement they came to. I'm quoting this because I think in this project, which is very fine, and congratulate CSEP and ICAS for this, I think you have to underpin it with some kind of philosophical basis, which conveys this sort of feeling. And India and China pride themselves on being long civilizations, ancient, with a huge, long view of history. And what do you learn from these histories except that things happen and the ups and downs? But there are certain core things which survive. I think that sort of philosophical underpinning, with the objective that let India and China show an example of how we can collaborate for the long term, whereas we may be cutting our feet and our arms or whatever in the short term. Now, this is a difficult thing to achieve, but the vanity of the two countries might well be tickled in terms of trying to envision something like this, because there is a philosophy of the East and all of this floating around, and this kind of thing can be also politically quite quite have a little place to perform. So I think instead of seeing this as a mundane project on oil and critical minerals and so on, I think we have to elevate it to a different level to start with. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any more? This lady here, then Lavish, and there's one lady at the back also. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm Jing from UNESCOP. And this topic is very facilitating and very timely, I think. So what I have learned from the speakers and also from this research is I think the main point is for India, China, between these two neighboring countries and also the big countries in the world is trust. So how to build, on top of that, how to build the trust is a priority for both of them. And as I saw the presentation which you mentioned, like for the solar panels, like China is not slightly withdraw their technical stuff from India. I think because they lost the trust, they don't know, because the India government has applied for the anti-dumping and also for other like trade barriers on it. And the China side lost the trust on India. And this can expand to other issues as well, for the water as well, which Professor Kurian has mentioned there. And how to build trust is, as I mentioned earlier, like India itself is kind of is a world leader in many like initiatives, such as India with France has established this International Solar Alliance. And also India has its own like national initiative on the SDG 7 roadmap. So I think India is quite a good like world player on many things. So how to bring the China on the table, I think can through the like such as regional cooperation platform, like. But however, in this part of world, like SAC and BIMSTEC is not functioning well, then how we can like find another way to play this game? We like for as a regional platform such as ESCAP, we just adopt the revolution under the water and climate nexus, and it's encouraged the countries to like work together for the transboundary water collaboration through not only the water itself, but a broader like climate. And as well as for like, as Professor Kurian said, like through the community-based solution is also another solution for that. The tension is there, like as we said, the geopolitical reasons. The government is driving the direction. But however, if the like grassroots solution is already there, then once the political side is ready, then we can just move ahead. Not only just wait, okay, the headwind is like for the negative side, then we wait. Then like the time won't wait for us, right? And the solution won't be ready. And also another gentleman mentioned here, I would like to say that Taiwan and India is kind of different things, because Taiwan, like I'm Chinese, so it's part of China. So sorry to mention, no. Yeah, so the Chinese government treat Taiwan and India is totally different way. So we will give like as it's part of China, we will give more benefit to them. But as India, we treat India as like neighborhood and also our like strategic partners in the future. But we are looking more wider pictures for that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So congratulations on taking this forward, Pooja. I'm much more of a cynic than many of the out here would be, but then there are still some spaces which I think you may want to consider. When you're looking at collaboration with an entity where there are great discomfort levels, then perhaps you may want to do that through third countries. So is there space in your project for looking at collaborations along with third countries in spaces such as research, in spaces where research not just on issues which are of common interest, but on areas such as the Arctic or the Antarctic or geoengineering, or things which are where both don't have anything direct to lose or gain, right? So that's one class of issue. The second is that you may also want to look into issues like which are softer issues, which are not directly trade related, where again the possibilities. I mean, it could be related to perhaps education and transfer of students. Like, for instance, there are thousands of students from India who are in China. We rarely see that happening the other way around. So there may be things which are not directly related to environment or climate, but in other issues. Third, ecology. That's another and completely empty space where there should be long-term interest in both countries. So I would just like to get some response on that and those kind of issues.
No, I'm all about absorbing, so I'm not going to
All right.
respond, but I will take those points into consideration while we do the project.
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to put up my question. My name is Purvi and I'm a master's student at University of Delhi. And thank you so much for such a collaborative discussion. I will quickly put up my question. So as already much being mentioned about data sharing and surveillance, so my question is, as climate cooperation increasingly includes data sharing on emissions, energy use, and satellite monitoring even so how do we prevent this from becoming a surveillance or control mechanism by technologically advanced countries, especially like China or any other countries in the West, if we put up this context in regards to?
Is there anyone else here who has questions? Or any comments? I mean, I think we're in learning mode actually. Yeah, I saw. But is anyone here? Okay, then we'll go online. I think Chris has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I have maybe two things to say on the energy transition. So my name is Chris Gong from Potsdam Institute of Climate Research. So one, in energy transition, I think it's important to realize solar panels are not necessarily the final product. It's a means to produce energy, right? So I say that, for example, in China in the 70s, when there's overproduction in the West, because the demand slowed in the West, we took in sort of machineries that make stuff, right? And I think China never said no to advanced technologies of that sort. And I think, Chinese demographic it plays a role here as well, right? I mean, we already have overcapacity and overproduction. So I think to think of solar panels as something that makes stuff is quite important. And also CDR, like carbon dioxide removal and for example, enhanced weathering, again, it's good for the climate and there's no market for it necessarily. And that's also where collaboration could happen. And same as thorium, right? Like thorium nuclear, India has also the largest reserve in thorium. So I think there's a lot of strategic things that come to mind. And second of all, just a comment, I really would like to know if there are actual China scholars in India, like scholars that just study the Chinese society, right? The sort of northern China society is different from the southern society. The production is differently organized, the clan structure, the market structure of that traditional society, and its sort of interaction with the more state-owned or state-directed version. And I would like to see more indigenous India understanding of Chinese society on its own term, and not just sort of like, we need this and we need that, and how do we talk to them? And I think these are two levels. Yeah, thanks for the great organization.
Okay. Anything else? Because I think we're out of time in 5 minutes. So this is your last chance. Any comments? Any questions?
Just want to thank you and also comment on the political will part. Just want to comment on the political will part of it because it has, I think, been very important even in the US-China cooperation conversations led by the Obama administration. It died down every time a Republican Party came together. And it would be interesting to see what it means for India and China and leadership because it is going to stay the same for a long time.
The political leadership. So the one question I can answer for the lady there is that I don't think China has imposed these emissions that we need to take a note of these. I think these are all come from the UNFCCC, from the Rio negotiations, which have been happening many, many years ago. So these are kind of Annex 1 and Annex 2 country conversations. This is not China, which is forcing us to start reporting our emissions or anything like that. I think, as Ambassador Kantha said, as we have found in our own work, actually in a lot of these multilateral engagements at UNFCCC, India and China often have the same stances when it comes to a lot of these conditionalities on the global south, for such as reporting emissions or phasing out versus phasing down. So I think on those terms, both countries are on the same page more or less. So I don't see any imposition suddenly from the China on us. I'm not even sure how they can impose anything on us. I mean, how will that even happen? So I think that is not in the place. To Chris Gong, yeah, of course, we have a lot of Chinese studies departments. We have Shruti ourselves here, who has lived in China for her master. She recently spent 2 months there. She speaks Mandarin. So we are definitely also understanding that we need to explore also how does China work before we can start talking about an India-China project. We are not blind to the fact that we also need Chinese perspectives in this, and that is where Singapore comes really good for us, because it's kind of a neutral ground where we can have a lot of those conversations without a lot of the geopolitics that surrounds what's happening within India. Because I'm very glad we have someone from UNESCO from China, because we don't want to be in an echo chamber ourselves, where you're just listening to domestic voices. We also want to know what Chinese think, what international scholars think from other countries as well. So I think all that will feed into the project, and that's why even this collaborative aspect, because we realize we cannot do it ourselves, given the geopolitical tensions of what's happening. We cannot do it independently as an Indian think tank. But yeah, I don't think we are blind to those. I think we see those weak spots, and yeah. And on that, I will just maybe give a minute to Ambassador Kantha, to Annika, and to Nimmi to maybe wrap things up. So, Ambassador Kantha, do you want to maybe say one or two comments based on what has been said in the audience, and then we can start to close down the
Just offer a couple of comments. One on what Professor Kurian said about transboundary rivers. Professor Kurian have been involved with these negotiations for a long time. Earlier, of course, no longer. It's not that we aim too low. Actually, China, as you know, is in this position of being upper riparian vis-a-vis virtually all countries, with one or two exceptions. And they have never agreed to discuss anything beyond, sharing of hydrographical data, that too only for wet season. Extending that by a few days, that required a lot of effort on our part. We have two MOUs which provide for projects under them. We have not been able to undertake any project. We have not been able to get any information on not just diversion projects. We have Yalung Sangpo, this project coming up, which will be 3 times the size of Three Gorges project. There was no prior consultation, no information has been shared. I don't think it's a case of our aiming too low. Frankly, we have not been able to persuade our Chinese friends to broaden scope of conversation. We wanted to have, in fact, sort of full-fledged agreement on cooperation, they have not responded positively. Coming to other points made about clean technology, clean energy, manufacturing. It's true that China has overwhelming advantage at this point of time, and I don't think we are in a position to sort of cut off our collaboration. We'll have to depend on them, but that doesn't preclude the option of developing our own capabilities, at least to a limited extent. I think that's highly desirable. Otherwise, just from point of view of import dependency, kind of money we'll be spending will be humongous, given our relatively, sort of ambitious plans for shifting to renewable energy.
Okay, thank you. Annika, do you want to come in for? Oh, I thought you'd done. Do you want to come in for a moment or two to just wrap up your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting to listen to all the thoughts. I think your study, you will have some more time to think where you want to focus on regional public good, like river management, or so I think that is or on the areas clean technology and critical minerals, or on just transition. These are and then is it bilateral collaboration, or is it through on a multilateral stage? So I believe there are opportunities in all these areas. And just to echo on the clean technology, yes, China is far ahead of most countries, including that doesn't just include India, but also Europe and the US in terms of technology. But maybe that's also a motivation to actually cooperate there through technology transfer. And then your different your analysis on the different forms of collaboration, I think, is very interesting. You can continue moving that forward and complement it with other mechanisms which might not have been included in this graph. And I welcome your approach to look for a partner research institution in China to have various views. I think there are some good partners. I'm happy to, after this meeting, share a few address. I have worked for almost 10 years working on climate finance and climate action in China. So I would be happy to share some contacts. Yeah, I wrap it up with here, and I wish you all the best for your study, which certainly will enrich the body of knowledge in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely be in touch after this, because we would love to speak with our Chinese colleagues as well. Nimmi, you get the last word.
Thanks, Pooja. So I think just a couple of thoughts. I've been listening to all of you. I think it's a great opportunity. This crisis, I think, that we are talking about, it could also be a catalyst for recalibrating a whole set of fundamental assumptions we have worked with. And it's also an opportunity, I feel, to rescale, as I said, the conversation itself. And by bringing scale into the conversation, we are also able to invert the policy and research case, as it were, to look at the micro, Because a very quick example would be, very often when we talk about the Brahmaputra, we talk about how securitized it is and how much of a metaphor of conflict it has become, and how much it tends to kind of speak to the larger sort of conflict-prone nature of the relationship between the two Asian power neighbors is. But very interestingly, a lot of again, I go back to the point that it is all of this involves it's all about the politics of framing. The amount that it involves choices, and choices involve trade-offs. So when we focus on the Brahmaputra, there's a predisposition in you and me as researchers. I will not talk about any other set of actors. Let's talk about as researchers, to look at the big river to the exclusion of the tributary. Say, look at the Brahmaputra, which is over hyper securitized, hyper masculinized discourse, to the exclusion of the tributary, say the Saral Banga, which is also a tributary of the same river, which is mercifully, because it has not got the attention from from a whole bunch of geopolitical or whatever the securitization, the fact that it does not, securitization, what it does is to shift everything, the issue out of the domain of normal politics into emergency politics. So all of that has not happened, let's say, to the other river, which is the tributary, which is a smaller one, which is the Saral Banga. And lo and behold, you see the Saral Banga, which is the Brahmaputra's tributary, becoming a fascinating site of innovation for collective action problems. In this particular case, on flood, so what India, what is, and this particular case is in villagers across India and Bhutan on Saral Banga have set up using their phones real-time alerts on flood alerts, alerts. And what this has done is provide, and this is continuing to be institutionalized at that level. It has not been scaled up, but it gives us a very interesting insight into the choices that we have made of when we focus on the big river to the exclusion of the small. It also gives us the choice to look at the tributary and the smaller river, and how it can offer us very interesting takeaways for the same set of collective action problems that we talk about. And because the Brahmaputra is kind of caught in that pincer hold of a certain logic that won't allow it to find for us to find entry points to so we can look elsewhere. So some of that is just a question of choices that you and I make.
Okay, on that note, I think we've had a very wide discussion. I will just ask Karthik Nachiappan and Constantino Xavier to make maybe a few comments and then close down. The stage is yours.
No. Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Following Iqbal, let me just start by thanking everyone again for being here. Thank you to Tino again and Pooja. Thank you to Ambassador Kantha, to Annika and Nimmi for a really great discussion. It's also great to continue our work on the climate and foreign policy intersection with CSEP. I think, as Pooja mentioned, we've done a few projects over the years, and they've been enriching and instructive for us, for hopefully for you too. And it's good to continue that. I think this particular project extends that further by going into the new area of geoeconomics and economic security, by asking and getting a better sense of how and where economic and security considerations collide when it comes to issues like energy and climate between India and China. And look, I think that's the reality that all of these countries face in Asia today is how do you manage and how do you organize your economic relationship with China, given your own specific security dynamic, which inevitably will condition and constrain that engagement, right? I think India exists at the forefront of this particular question of economic security. I think almost all Southeast Asian countries faced the similar question. I think living in Southeast Asia, you see it play out in different ways, right? I think all of them rely deeply on China for growth, but are also wary of the leverage that growth and interdependence with China gives China that kind of overload. But I think unlike Southeast Asia, I think India has scale, as we've talked about today. It has size, and it has more agency, but it also has a far more difficult security challenge. And I think we've seen this economics and security debate play out here over the last 6 months. So I think through this work, we get to really ask and inquire where the line is drawn on economic security when it comes to energy and climate issues. I think you've seen it being covered on technology issues, on manufacturing, on some of the other issues. I think here we get to really think through the economic, the energy and climate aspects of it. I think briefly just to just talk about what we'll do in Singapore through the workshops. I think in terms of the issues that we can cover, and some of that has been talked about here. The first is clean technologies, which China has a really has dominance. So issues like solar panels, EVs, battery storage, and what's the scope for some kind of engagement there. Second is infrastructure, financing, and investment. I think China is already doing that all across Asia, bilaterally and through other multilateral frameworks. It's investing in solar, wind, and other kinds of transport and mobility projects. And finally, knowledge sharing. I think we've all talked about that. Training, capacity building, and different kinds of information sharing, and so on. So there's a lot here that we can actually do in Singapore. I think Singapore and Southeast Asia are also dealing with these issues and challenges, and there's a lot of consideration and talk and information on China in Singapore and what China is doing with its own energy and climate transition. So let me just end on a sanguine note. I think, look, there is strategic mistrust between both countries. There are a lot of political constraints, which we were talked about, which Ambassador Kantha talked about. I think this could limit direct bilateral cooperation, but I think progress can still occur through multilateral frameworks, COP, which Ambassador Kantha mentioned, the AIIB, the NDP, which Annika mentioned. So there are other platforms. It could happen through indirect technology flows. Other countries may be involved. Other partners may be involved. So we got to be a little bit creative about how we're thinking about this question and issue. And of course, through commercial imports. And as Ambassador Kantha mentioned, there's a lot of that already happening, right? It's flowing into India from China. And so I think we get the chance to think through and inquire and just get a better sense of what can happen. And I think that's the biggest value added here that we can add over the next year as these economic security conversations deepen. Thank you again.
Well, what more to add to that? I think, Karthik, you've wrapped it up really nicely. Maybe I'll start with the most important 2 words of the afternoon. Thank you, Iqbal Bhai. Thank you, thank you, thank you. ISAS-NUS has been a phenomenal partner for us. We like to work, with all due respect for the institution and my own institution, with people, individuals. That's when the best research happens and the best tie-ups. And we've been really lucky to work with you, Karthik, over the last 2-3 years now. It's probably step 3 or 4 into our cooperation. And I think it's thanks to you and your trust and your time to spend time with us here in Delhi that we've been able to develop this climate diplomacy space, of which we're seeing this new chapter on India and China. And I'll say that this probably is the most difficult project we've ever done. And it's been just phenomenal over the last 2 hours. Pooja, thanks to you for bringing this really amazing set of people together, because I think through these 3 speakers, and of course the presentation of the project that we're doing, we got so many levels of analysis covered, right? You took us to Ladakh, Nimmi. Ambassador Kantha took us back to 2009 and the framework agreements and what worked and what didn't work, and the dam that is being built on which India is not being consulted. Annika took us to another site of international cooperation, which is the multilateral level, where a lot is happening and sometimes a lot is not happening and might not happen over the next few years, but there is hope there too. So that's, I think, one huge value for all of us for this project. I think I thank on behalf of Pooja and our entire team that we've really benefited, I think, from these last 2 hours, which is frankly the first step. As someone very wise once said, every big march begins with one small step. I think this is the first step based already on the work that we've done of survey. But two quick points. One is what we love doing at CSEP is evidence-based research. Evidence-based research is exactly the work that we've benefited from someone like Shruti Jargar, a China analyst that Pooja has mentioned, that spent many weeks looking at what has happened, tracing back the history of India-China engagement. Sometimes we want to look forward and we forget to look backwards of what has worked and what has not worked. Ambassador Kantha, I'd be dying to ask you, we'll have an offline discussion, why did those projects not produce tangible effects? Often from government and industry and stakeholders, we get that question. Why have things not worked? How can they work? And by recreating that past, as in the study, I think we will find some very important solutions. The second one is that we love doing projects that are done under rainy, stormy circumstances. Why? Because there's no doubt that there will be a time T in time, maybe 1 week from now, 1 year, 10 years from now, where India and China will politically engage and start looking at projects where they can cooperate. That time will come. There's no doubt about that. We're talking about 2.88 billion people that will connect. They will certainly not have no direct flights as currently and zero connections on most things. So we want to be prepared for that day, and that is the research we like doing in the rainy days. So when the blue skies open up, we are ready with a set of solutions, to speak of Dr. Rakesh Mohan's attitude invitation, that can be activated by policymakers in India, in China, and across the region. And that's why also we're doing it in Singapore, because what India and China are doing, I'm not sure which speakers mentioned this, has huge implications for the regional comments, for the regional order, for regional development, for the global climate transition. I'll end on one last note, and that will be a slightly skeptical note. Hope is not a policy. That's what a US former State Department Secretary of State used to say, George Shultz. Hope and attitude towards solutions is wonderful. We need to find pragmatic solutions in the world as it exists. And when we talk about dependence and have problems defining the term of dependence, we have a problem as researchers. Today, if you talk to industry leaders in this country and to government officials, but forget the government officials and the IFS and the services and the government, etc., but talk to industry. Industry is worried about dependence, which means we have had examples of weaponization of leverage in the past by China, and therefore there is a genuine concern about dependence in those terms. That is a very concrete dependence that can harm the developmental ambitions of this country and the growth prospects of this ambition. So we have to find pragmatic solutions that overcome that or can find responses to that. And therefore, yes, there are headwinds. I think, to use your term, I think you used the word headwinds, one of you, which are very important. But despite those headwinds, I'm sure this project will flourish and will find progress, to use one of the words of our institutions, forward on finding those solutions, hopefully in Singapore, to these workshops with NUS and ISAS. Thank you all for this discussion, and a big round of applause for Pooja and for the speakers today. Thank you.